After making a copy of the picture, I took the contents of the package I'd received to the police. Just as I'd figured, the fingertips were much too damaged for any kind of identification. They checked the box itself for DNA, but it was, of course, wiped clean before being sent to me. The only fingerprints on it were from the male personnel, who all checked out. They said they would keep the investigation open, but that was the same thing they'd said so long ago before then. I definitively decided I was going to check it out for myself. I told my wife that I had to go out of state to do some research for my current project. I'm pretty sure she knew I was lying, but she let me go without too much of a fight. Not wanting to leave my family without their primary protector, we set up an elaborate plan to transport each of our kids to different places. Our daughter went to my sister's house in Wisconsin. My son went to my wife's parents back in California. I said elaborate because we had other people help out with the decoy cars in the respective states for each trip to make certain that they weren't followed. Once I felt my kids were safe, I made sure my wife was comfortable staying home alone, which she assured me that she was. I made sure that she had ready and immediate access to the gun that we kept in the house just in case, and I set off for the Midwest. After just about 15 hours of driving, I arrived at the small town that was the home to Daisy's Diner, which I decided would be my first stop. I pulled into the lot that I hadn't been in since the car was first broken into. It was dirtier than I remembered. The lot was littered with assorted garbage. This time, I parked directly in front of the large window of the building, so I could see my car from the inside. I walked into the restaurant, and the first thing I saw was the same waitress that had served my family and I during the first visit. Only this time, I took note of her name. Roberta. There's a few other people in the restaurant. 2 men eating together at the booth, a man and a woman eating together at another booth, and 3 men eating separately at the counter. I didn't recognize any of them. By her demeanor, I determined that Roberta didn't remember me from our previous meeting. I sat down and she asked what I wanted to drink. I told her that I wasn't there for a meal. I took out the copy I'd made of the picture of the little girl and asked Roberta if, by some miracle, she had any idea who the girl in the picture was. She looked at it for what seemed like a long time, but ended up telling me that she didn't recognize her. As she handed me the photo back, one of the patrons said loudly, "What the hell is going on out there?" I looked to him and saw that he was directing his attention outside. I spun around and there was a hooded man standing at the driver's side door of my car. I immediately got up and ran outside, and as soon as I got to the door, the man took off running. I gave chase around the corner of Daisy's, and that's when I blacked out. The last thing I remembered seeing was a mask under a hood, and something solid hitting me across the side of my head, knocking me unconscious. When I woke up, I was in the dark. I wasn't bound or gagged in any way, but I couldn't discern my surroundings. I found myself able to stand up straight, and when I did, about 25 televisions all around turned on at once. They were all showing static with the volume on full blast. I yelled, "Hello?" at the top of my lungs. But the sound of my voice was drowned out by the static. Then so suddenly that it made me jump, each of the screens changed to a picture. It was the same room I'd seen in the video of the murder of the little girl. The same white sheet was hanging up, draped onto the floor, though this time, blood stained the bottom portion of the sheet. I assumed it was the little girl's blood, but I had no way of knowing if that was his only victim. Somehow, I doubted it. A man came in the frame, but kept his back to me for the entirety of the video. He spoke to me in a high-pitched yet gravelly voice. The best way I can describe his tone was it was childlike. He spoke exactly like a child. "Hi, Katie's dad. I'm glad you got my present. I don't want to do no harm to your daughter, the greatest artist. I just want her to be my friend and draw me pictures. I sent back the ones that weren't my favorites, but I've kept the ones that are my favorites, and those are mine now. All I want is friendship with Katie. Katie. She's just a very good artist. But you won't let me be her friend. You're making me get out of the way, and I don't want to do that because friends don't hurt friends, Dad. I want to be a good friend and not a bad friend, so I'm going to make this simple, easy. Easy peasy. If you promise to let your daughter, the artist, be friends with me, I'll leave you alone, but if you still won't be nice, I'm going to get really angry. You promise to be nice? I muttered out, yes. Unsure as to if it was a video or a live feed or if I was being watched or not. There was a moment's silence, and then he spoke again, this time. Calm down. Good. Since you're being such a meanie pants, I'm not gonna tell you how to get out. And then the video simply cut off. Now, once again in complete darkness, I felt the walls around me for some kind of door. I had noticed that behind the televisions, the space went farther back than I could see. I tried my best to move the TVs, but there was some kind of old 50, 60-inch set that couldn't be easily moved. I then thought to feel around the ceiling, which was just above my head. And at one point, I was able to push up and sunlight slipped out through the cracks. Locked by nothing but a flimsy latch, I quickly got out and found myself in the middle of a large forest. There was a bag next to the hatch door that had all of my belongings in it. I took out my phone, which had a little signal as possible while still actually having some, and used its built-in compass after unsuccessfully trying to place a 911 call. After walking west, not sure why I picked that direction to head in, for about an hour and a half I came to a road. Then after going north for another 45 or so minutes, a truck pulled up and asked where I was headed. I told him Daisy's Diner. At that point, we were only about a half hour from the restaurant. I guess I'd walked the right direction after all. The man was quiet. Didn't ask me any questions, much to my appreciation. He dropped me off at Daisy's and nodded his head as a goodbye, shaking his head at the offer of me buying gas for the help, and sped off. I got in my car and looked in the mirror. I had a cut on my forehead that had been stitched up and cared for. Still hurt like a son of a bitch. I realized that after I finally had a signal on my phones, they came to me. And I took them back to the place I was held. The first thing they told me was that there wasn't anything in any direction for miles. No businesses, houses, cabins, nothing. They searched the hatch that I'd been in, but found all the televisions to be smashed and the cords cut. They searched behind the TVs where I'd suspected there being a tunnel. But just around a small bend it stopped. Like it was the beginning of a tunnel that never got finished. They again took a report and examined my injury, saying that it had been properly stitched and treated. In the end, I was dropped off in my car at Daisy's and told that I'd be called with any further information, as they'd be investigating the area around where I was held. But now, it was starting to get dark and my head was absolutely killing me to the point where I didn't feel comfortable driving for too long, so I headed to the only place I knew was close enough for me to get some rest. And the possibilities of an answer. I headed back to the motel, where I was given the first picture. When I pulled in, I looked through the window of the front office and saw the man from those years before. I can't say for sure, but it almost seemed like when he saw me, he picked up the phone, said a few words, and hung up. At the time, I thought it was just me being paranoid because when I walked in, he didn't give off any signs of remembrance. He seemed genuinely curious when I brought up what had happened during the first foray at his place of business. After a short back and forth, I got a room for the night, went inside, and passed out before I could even take any safety measures. Luckily, I woke up and found that nothing had happened. At least, until I went outside. I exited the room and saw that all 4 of my tires had been gouged open. All I could do was chuckle. This seemed like some pathetic action compared to the psychological torture my family and I had endured at his hands before this. I called a local mechanic and he was there within an hour changing all my tires. And then I was back on the road, again taking all the twists and turns I could to make sure that I wasn't being followed. I returned home after about 20 hours of driving and got my family all back together. They had remained unharmed during my absence. Things went on fine for quite a long time. Over a year, by my count. Then, one night, I woke up to a knocking on our front door. I got the gun from the safe and approached the door, which was repeating. Knock, knock. Knock, knock. I disabled the alarm system, swung open the door, and saw that there was a folded up piece of paper on the doormat under a small rock. I stepped over the picture and ran to the front lawn to see who it was, as they couldn't have gotten far between their last knock and me opening the door. I looked down the street in both directions and saw no one. I'll admit I wasn't quite thinking clearly. Even with the adrenaline, I was still half asleep. And I turned around and walked back to my door. I picked up the piece of paper off the ground and walked in. After closing and locking the door and resetting the alarm, I opened the paper to see which picture it was this time. This particular picture was a self-portrait Katie had done. Full-body drawing of herself. The addition to this one was that another thinly drawn version of the stalker was present, holding my daughter's hand. Katie had written above the photo the word me, but now there was a bold X through it, and written next to it was us. Thinking it was just another attempt to scare us, I set the picture in a drawer and resolved to call the police, but first, I went to check on Katie. I went up to her room, pushed open her mostly closed door. I felt the color drain from my face, and that ever-familiar feeling of my heart sinking to my stomach, but this time, it was worse. This time, it felt like it never stopped dropping. Katie wasn't in her bed, and her window was wide open, a breeze blowing in, making her drapes wave. My daughter had been kidnapped.